So right now I'm working on a project that's about difficult literary women and the idea of the common good. And so I'm using experimental women's writing and trying to map that writing to sort of theorize a literature of the commons. So I'm using contemporary commons discourse. But I'm also interested, besides the kind of formal and aesthetic aspects, in the kind of affective aspects or aspects of characterization. So difficult women in the sense of difficult women who don't kind of conform to or sort of show the right kind of feeling. So that's kind of what this talk picks up on a little bit today. And it's titled Bad Affect, Difficult Women, and the Academy. And it's a bit discursive, so I hope if you have trouble following, you just tell me to slow down. Okay. 6 women of differing age, country of origin, and opinion of pound are sent to work in the East Wing on the 13th floor of a mostly disused tower, each on a fixed-term pro rata contract. Some word problems. How many women on fixed-term contracts does it take to add up to a full-time post? If there are 4 rooms in the East Wing of the 13th floor of a mostly disused tower, and 2 of the rooms are filled floor to ceiling and ceiling to floor with upturned tables and chairs, what percentage of a department's emotional labor are 6 women expected to take on? If 2 women traveling in the same direction along parallel tenure tracks finish their PhDs 3 months apart, who is likely to be made redundant first? 6 women of differing age, country of origin, and opinion on pound are sent to work in the East Wing on the 13th floor of a mostly disused tower, each on a fixed-term pro rata contract. Feedback from the hiring committee. Compared to other candidates, you are too self-contained. Compared to the other candidates, you are either due to aloofness or inability. Compared to the other candidates, you are rejected outright, on site. Compared to the other candidates, you are at times required to submit to routinely humiliating requests. Compared to the other candidates, questions posed to you came thick, fast, and unremitting. Compared to the other candidates, prove it again. Compared to the other candidates, you allowed yourself to be interrupted twice as many times. Compared to the other candidates, you were be reasonable. Compared to the other candidates, you are not our sort of person. Affect matters. 6 women of differing age, country of origin, and opinion on pound are sent to work in the East Wing on the 13th floor of a mostly disused tower, each on a fixed-term pro rata contract. Murray, Crowley, and Vangren, 2016, ask, who organizes the post-seminar wine reception? Whose shoulders do we cry on? Who challenges everyday discriminatory comments? Do we consider this work? 6 women are sent to work on the 13th floor of a pro rata tower. What do they see from the window? They see red. A red sunrise over a red sea, a red moon over a red hill, a red ruin. How does it read? According to Sarah Ahmed, anger moves us by moving us outwards. While it creates an object, it also is not simply directed against an object, but becomes a response to the world as such. Feminist anger involves a reading of the world. Write a comparative analysis of the following passages. Your discussion should attend primarily to the particularities of its language, gender, genre, affect, and theme. Passage 1. Tutors are eligible to claim for time spent undertaking office hours, administrative tasks, email time, and meetings up to a maximum cap. The maximum number of admin hours a tutor can claim is based on the contact hours spent teaching across the semester. For example, if a tutor taught 4 hours per week for 11 weeks, they would have 44 contact hours and would be eligible to claim up to 2 hours admin time in that semester. Passage 2. You may arrange to see your tutor outside the tutorial hour to discuss any questions you may have relating to the course and work for it. At such an appointment, you may consult your tutor about preparing for an assignment or receive feedback about a completed piece of work. Tutors will also be willing to discuss any general queries you may have about the literature you are studying. Here, anger becomes the axis where feminist research meets the work we do alongside and around this research that enacts the feminist principles our research espouses. Like Sian Nai's ugly feelings, anger can be thought of as a mediation between the aesthetic and the political in a non-trivial way. Likewise, The very effort of thinking the aesthetic and political together, a task whose urgency seems to increase in proportion to its difficulty in an increasingly anti-utopian and functionally differentiated society, is a prime occasion for ugly feelings. Nye's ugly feelings are ambient, well-suited to interpreting ongoing states of affairs. They're feelings that are useful to help us think things through. They serve as a means of recognizing and polemically responding to social inequalities. In an effort to neutralize their political power, bad feelings are feminized and morally devalued. Suspicion is cast on the validity of these responses, and they are converted into a reflection of petty or diseased selfhood. She's just an unhappy person, they'll say. But what's wrong with being unhappy with the exigencies of the world as it is anyway? For Nye, the way people respond to forms of negative affect should alert us to the fact that feelings are more likely to be stripped of their critical implications when the impassioned subject is female. This is how, to paraphrase Ahmed, in pointing out the problem, you are seen to create the problem, and you, without much further ado, become the problem. So consider this a paean to bad feelings and feeling bad, to their political utility, because it's precisely these feelings that orientate us outwards, that help us to draw the line between the problem in front of us and the conditions that created it. For Ahmed, feminism involves a reading of the response of anger. It moves from anger into an interpretation of that which one is against, whereby associations or connections are made between the object of anger and broader patterns or structures. Anger is creative. It works to create a language with which to respond to that which one is against, whereby the what is what is renamed and brought into a feminist world. What is this language? It's a language of no. It's a language carved out by a long-term grinding down, a drip, 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 what Nye might call irritation, and it's a language that's constituted by attendant little refusals. In her 2008 book, Ugly Feelings, Nye theorizes a series of bad feelings that are created in that they are underlined by refusal, a refusal to perform affect in specific ways, which is also a refusal to stick to the script. The poet Anne Boyer calls these feelings dramatizations of just not. History, she writes, is full of people who just didn't. They said no thank you, turned away, escaped to the desert, lived in barrels, burned down their own houses, killed their rapists, pushed away dinner, meditated into the light. No is a turning away from the social contract, a way of being at odds with what Boyer calls the merciless and circulatory conditions of all the capitalist yes. None of what I'm saying is new, but the way women can mobilize their bad feelings and feeling bad as feminist practice in the academy is important. Our intervention should be geared toward what Gertrude Stein called the grammar of looking, as a way of reorientating us towards reality. Our language of no can carve out a space for collective world-making precisely because it makes us think about the conditions under which we might say yes again. For instance, Murray, Crowley, and Van Gren call for the work that women do in universities alongside their research and teaching to be recognized as work, arguing that this work should be waged accordingly. Echoing Sylvia Federici's demand in the 1970s for wages for housework, Murray and her co-authors call for recognizing the quotidian transactions and interactions of higher education as work, is an attempt to make visible the extent to which higher education today requires unwaged reproductive labor in order to contain the cost of labor power. The process of making this visible is also a process of refusal, a draining of the source of this unpaid labor, which Federici believed would break the process of capital accumulation. The demand for wages for emotional labor is then also a demand for wages against emotional labor. It's a first step to eventually refusing that work as the expression of women's nature, as Federici puts it. The labor women undertake towards the reproduction of a department's intellectual life, work which is not recognized, still less paid, has been crucial to the productivity, performance, and therefore profitability of our departments. How can we use this to our advantage, to envision a different future for higher education? Well, to quote Federici, more smiles, more money. Nothing will be so powerful in destroying the healing virtues of a smile. This demand should not be read in economistic terms, in terms of money's remuneration, but as a way of using money to break the bank. Our no is not an end in itself. So how can we find a way for our refusals of the social contract to model new patterns of academic citizenship? How can a no be productive? A starting point. No, we will no longer separate the intellectual and the political, separate political activism and the reproduction of everyday life in the university. For instance, no, we will not compromise the integrity of our feminist research in order to be measurable, in order to be squeezed through a metric, to be matriculated. Federici writes that we need to overcome the constant denial and irresponsibility concerning the consequences of our actions, resulting from the destructive ways in which the social division of labor is organized in capitalism. Short of that, the production of our life inevitably becomes a production of death for others. So maybe it's time to think about whether and to what extent the way we approach our research depends upon the suppression of the research of others. How can we configure our no through what Van Gren has called a feminist politics of responsibility, and Bell Hooks has called a politics of accountability, a politics that opens a field of possibility within which we can conceive of a more pluralistic understanding of our social structures? We might start by taking the matter of the way we conduct research more seriously. How does our citational practice, for instance, reproduce the world of serious intellectual work around certain thinkers? How does our citational practice contribute to the erasure of the work of other thinkers? Whose work do we cite in support of our arguments, and why? Ahmed and other literary activists have highlighted the ways in which citational practices function as successive reproductive technologies, ways of reproducing the world around certain bodies. Disciplinary orthodoxies dictate avenues of so-called serious intellectual work. In Queer Phenomenology, Ahmed describes the paradox of the footprint, how paths are created by being followed and followed by being created. How the more the path is traveled upon, the easier it can be to travel along that path. In other words, as feminist and anti-racist critics have long argued, and as Van Gren more recently points out, the canon of any scholarly field is a political matter, and certainly not value-free, which is also to say that the outcome is not inevitable. If we take the politics of citation seriously, if we refuse to reproduce the field of scholarship around bodies that don't take us seriously as thinkers, if instead we think not only about the message of our research, but also how we choose to convey that message, it might be possible to break a feminist path. We can edit and bring out writers' work, read and review it, teach it, organize conferences around it, make our own research as open and as accessible as possible. This is another way of saying that representation is important, who is represented and also how they're presented, in addition to the kind of scholarly community our research produces and reproduces. All the little resistances, the would you ask a man that's, the refusals to cede the term of the debate are necessary to foster a waywardness in the way we reproduce intellectual life. They are necessary if we were going to imagine a future for higher education that does not look like 6 women sent to work in the east wing of the 13th floor of a mostly disused building, each on a fixed-term pro-rata contract. The way we speak and the way we write necessarily intervene in the grammar of looking because, as Stein writes, the process of seeing is also the process of saying. But at the same time, we cannot, Federici argues, build an alternative society and a strong self-reproducing movement unless we redefine in more cooperative ways our reproduction. We cannot, this is Van Gren now, quoting Pereira, simply work harder, manage our time better. We must, she writes, make realistic adjustments to our working conditions while simultaneously demanding their improvement. Unless accompanied by collective struggles for social and material change, an intersectional feminist pedagogy can only go so far. We need each other, and we need to create common spaces for and around each other, spaces of teaching and learning and research that deny claims to neutrality and objectivity, and uncover the way such claims mask oppressive relations of power within the production and reproduction of knowledge. So, 6 women of differing age, country of origin, and opinion on pound are sent to work in the East Wing on the 13th floor of a mostly disused tower, each on a different length of temporary pro-rata contract. What do? They feel bad. They in fact take up the mantle of feeling bad because they refuse to feel good about conditions that threaten their health and their pedagogies. They collaborate, they comment, they conspire. They say no so that they can say yes. Thanks.